Yes, please go ahead. Yes, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the invitation for this great workshop. And I am Deepak Pathak, and I am an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University in the Robotics Institute and Machine Learning Department. So let me just begin. So the main question which drives research in our lab is this, or this main motivation is the fact that our belief that generalization is the hallmark of human intelligence. Like we really believe this is the only property that makes us who we are, our ability to adapt to diverse environment on the fly as we go. So despite the fact we have seen all these great results in AI, from playing Go to speech, vision, cars that drive themselves, there is a huge contrast between how the learning happens in these machines and how it happens in humans. And this big contrast is the fact that these systems are heavily specialized. Like we cannot use the same system that can play the game of Go to drive a car. Now, one might say maybe this example is a bit extreme because I'm asking a car to play Go and drive itself may not be very practical. So let me give you how serious this problem is by a very simple example of machine learning 101, supervised learning, right? Now in supervised learning, we know about this result on image classification on ImageNet. Like given the input image, I want to train a model that outputs the class in the image, like let's say Labrador. Now the way this model is trained is by showing a lot of examples of dogs, correct? From a data set, which is training and test. Now we all know this result that we achieve superhuman accuracy on these models. And this is a real result, like ResNet architecture beats humans by a margin and works really well across million examples. But when I take the same model and test on this example from YouTube, let's say this dog over here, the same state-of-the-art model completely fails to generalize. It finds things like cobra snake, ray fish, flatworm in the same very video of containing dog, and the accuracy drops by a large amount. Now, if you would ask a vision person, then the answer would be, oh, well, these models are trained on ImageNet, where data set has certain properties like center of image, large objects, and real world is not the same. And that's the point I'm making, that real world will never be the same to your data set. It is always changing, always adapting. And in machine learning, we have this assumption in almost every setup that let's assume that the training distribution be same as test distribution. And in real world, this assumption violates all the time. And whenever this happens, our models fail to generalize. Like this kind of generalization is even worse in robotics because like we can do all these parlor tricks, but if there are failures in robotics, they are much more expensive and catastrophic to the researchers who own these robots. Okay, like here example of robot falling on itself. So the main question that we are driven by is how do we build algorithms that can help us generalize beyond what you are trained for? So beyond your training setup. So let me first motivate this some approaches in our lab through some example, a very concrete example. So let's say you have a robot over here, and I have this image of the scene of this rope. I want to tie a knot with this rope in this manner. My task is to get actions that can do this job. Okay. Now you would ask, how does this work in practice? Because we have robots that can do certain things. So in practice, what really happens is that you give lots of examples of by controlling the robot manually and give it such that you get all the actions that are required to perform the task. This is called imitation learning. And this is the most common way, but this is very tedious for the expert, as we see on the screen. But the bigger problem is that this is specific to one goal. Now this human has to do this whole tedious thing for every new task the robot might want to do. This is not how learning happens in humans in any way, or generalization happens in humans anyway. Then there is second family of approaches called reinforcement learning, which Mark Bellemer talked about in very detail. And the key idea here, just a very high level idea, is that you start from some current image. You want to learn a policy that can eventually go to the goal image, right? Now, when you reach the goal image, you give some candy or some big bonus, and you train your policy in the same way to maximize this reward. Now, in practice, so this is a very general form of algorithm, and in practice, the policy starts from scratch in the beginning. But if you think about this, if the policy is completely random, how likely is it the case that it will go and just tie the knot immediately, or even some samples, like even ever? So with my estimate, it will take these many samples for the robot to tie this knot just once. And this is like maybe more than my PhD duration. So this is not a very practical way to go about solving this task in the real world. So what happens in practice? Well, in practice, the story is a bit different in the sense that, for example, you have seen all these results on Atari and other environments. These are amazing results. Like you can train an agent to learn from pixels. But the catch here is that we are relying on the reward of the game as supervision. And this reward provides a dense supervision at almost every time step. And like even in tasks like navigation, where the goal is to reach some sparse or end target location, most approaches shape the reward function by giving incentives like apples in between to guide the agent to reach the end location. Right? This is a very, very dense supervision, which is being given to the agent. Now, but real world does not give you apples. In real world, the reward could be delayed by days, months, or years, such that it's hard to propagate back to where you are. So how does this girl, child here know what should she do to become pilot 20 years later? Like, does she backprop the objective from the 20 years later, like to get into MIT as a PhD student and then get into Air Force and do this and that? Not really, right? And this is what psychologists argue at least in the last couple of decades. The picture has completely flipped, that these babies are driven by something known as intrinsic motivation or curiosity, and not by extrinsic goal to optimize to do something later in life. And they do what they like in a way. So what is the purpose of this? Well, the one argument is that the purpose of this is to learn skills which can later help you generalize to new tasks. And this form of learning without goals is not just for babies. In fact, this is very common in our biological world. So let me show you this example famously given by Alison Gopnik of a chicken and a crow. Now, on the left, we have chicken, which are considered one of the dumbest animals on the planet. Like they're really dumb in the sense that they peck for grains and that's what they do all their life. Now on the right, you have a crow, which have similar brain size, similar cortical structure, but they are really, really smart. Like they are as smart as chimpanzees in various aspects. Like they can pick food and do certain things. Like here is a crow trying to pick food from this by making tool from a twig, which is a branch of a tree. So these are really smart. And the argument is the difference is in the length of their childhood. So crows have almost 1.5 years of childhood, while chicken have maybe 1 day of childhood. Like they have no childhood at all. They just peck for grains from very beginning. And there is a stark correlation on the x-axis. This is length of childhood. On the y-axis is how intelligent the species is. And there is a stark correlation across a variety of primate species, where we see that intelligence of the species kind of correlates with how long is their childhood. So this leads to a conjecture that maybe exploration without any goal is not just an artifact of not being an adult. It's actually the reason that leads us to generalize and adapt to novel circumstances in real life. But then the question is, what do we do if there is no goal? Like, can we somehow instantiate these ideas in computational terms? So this will be the part of the focus of my talk today, but I have other things as well. So let me first quickly go through this. How do we try to bring these ideas to machine learning systems? So this is something which we have been thinking about for a while. So this goes back to games in the beginning. So I'll just give intuition via games and then move to real robotic setups. So let's say there is an agent, and let's say you see the screen of a game here. Let's say this Mario agent, and you have actions here. In reality, there are 14 actions, but I'm just to show here on the screen, I'm just showing 4 actions for easiness. And it can press left, it can go right. If it presses right, it presses up, it goes up. On down, nothing happens. Now, in this scenario right now, there is no goal. So think of it like an agent starting like just born or something, cannot do really much, just play around. And by pressing buttons, it can see what is happening in the real world. Now, what does this agent do is it starts by building a model of how the world works. So a forward model. So it tries to imagine from this own data, what will happen if it does something in the world. So let's say, what happens if I press up? Well, in the previous example, when I pressed up, the agent went up and come down. So it expects to go up and then come down, right? And then in reality, same thing happens, the agent becomes happy and its belief is reinforced. But this is not always like your reinforcement of your belief don't make you learn things, right? Because when you're correct, and you learn when you're incorrect. So like in this example, for instance, agent presses up, it expects to go up and come down, but because now there is a pillar which it is seeing for the first time, it goes up, but it does not come down. Its prediction gets violated. And this is one of the, this work is from 2017. So at that point we said, okay, let's treat this prediction error as a notion of curiosity to guide the agent. So curiosity here is defined as difficulty to predict the outcome of your own action. Let's just recap the high level idea real quick. Act in the world, get data, train a model. Use the model to make predictions about what will happen next. As you make predictions, wherever your error is high, you say the agent is more curious. Now here is the key part. Whenever you say the agent is curious, it goes back and explores it more. Like whatever you are curious about, you do it more and more, right? And as you do it more and more, your data increases. When your data increases, your model becomes better. And as your model becomes better, your error goes down. And as your error goes down, your curiosity goes down. So now you have to find something else to be curious. So in a way, you are always searching for new things which you are curious about. And this is like continual learning. There is no training, test, any such scenario. And there had been a lot of formulations before about this, like visitation count, which Marx suggested, uncertainty. And this formulation that I just described falls in the right category here. And what the difference is that we are primarily focused on learning without any end goal, while most of the prior work kind of focuses on when you have a sparse or some end goal and you explore towards that. So let's see this example over here. Like this is the game, Mario, which I played in my childhood. So I kill the reward here. So we remove the reward altogether, nothing. In the beginning of training, not much happens. The agent is just jumping around, not doing much. But after you are done training the agent with this curiosity-driven learning, it learns to go around and do interesting things. It learns to jump over pipe. It learns to cross levels. Like it crosses like 10 levels of the game, much farther than I could go in my childhood. But there's no reward here as well. So there are emergent behaviors like jumping over enemies, pipes, killing enemies, right? And now you would ask, why is it happening? Because there is no goal. It doesn't know this is a game. It doesn't know that it has to win. Well, the agent in the beginning, the agent likes to kill itself in the scenario because there is no goal, and getting killed is fun because the game restarts and something new happens. But after a while, the same pattern repeats, and then getting killed in the game becomes boring. So the agent learns to stay alive to be curious. Now, if it stays at one place, that's boring. So it learns to jump over pipes to be curious. So it kills the enemies because enemies might kill the agent. So it's like a chain reaction. So it wants to kill enemies to stay alive to be curious. So you can extend this argument more and more like a chain reaction, and that these complex kind of things come around. And not just Mario, we also tried this on a bunch of environments from Atari, Robo School, and all of them show decent behaviors. I would not say they are matching an agent that kind of is trained with the reward because they don't have any reward. So they don't know that the playing game is the goal, but still they are able to display or get very good behaviors. And the difference is that there is no reward in any of these scenarios. It's completely unsupervised. And we tried a lot of other environments as well, from robotics to everything. But these are simulation environments, and they do not capture the real world setting really well because they are not real world, right? And there was some argument on this in the previous talk as well with Marx, the balloon project. So in our case, our real world is more going toward robotics side. Like now, can I make these algorithms go from simulation to robots? So I'll not go into more into detail, but in simulation, these things take millions of samples. So we have to do something new to make them work in robotic setups. And one of the papers which we had a few years back, which we are still building upon and making it into model-based setups, is this curiosity by disagreement. Now, the only difference is that instead of defining curiosity as prediction error, we define it as the disagreement of multiple models inside the agent. So agent is maintaining a bunch of models. And the reason for that is disagreement is a much nicer behaved objective. I can backpropagate through it because it's differentiable. It does not require you acting in the world because you can compute how much you disagree inside your head completely in imagination. You can just train multiple models and compare them with each other and never had to act in the world to compute this prediction error. So let me show you an example of this in the real robotic settings outside of the game. Now, before I do that, let's see a random exploration example. So here is a robot trying to explore randomly, right? And it completely does kind of boring things in some way. And this is still the most common way to collect data in robot learning literature. And so what is the catch? The catch is usually whenever you have seen such robots collecting data, usually you see like hundreds of these robots, right, to make it in parallel. And but in academia, we cannot afford hundreds of robots. So there's only one robot. So this is why the problem is harder here. Second, there are lots of objects usually that people put at one place. That robot goes randomly and it can grasp at least something. So we make it harder by giving only 2 or 3 objects. That it has to do really smart things to collect data. But we can make the algorithm smarter. So in here, this is curiosity-driven exploration with a few hours of training. And it can go and then move the object in after a few hours. So now this is collecting data. And the goal of this data is to build models and then use those models and plan for goals given by humans at test time, right? So we want to go from exploration to achieving goals. Because in the end, like, no matter how much motivation I give about babies and crows, I'm a pragmatist. So in the end, I want the robots to work and achieve goals that are given by the end user. So like the same example I showed in the beginning of tying a knot. So here the robot explores at training time, builds model. Then at test time, we show these images. Can you do this? Can you do that? So for instance, let's take this knot tying example. So now here is this human comes and robot is just watching the human. It does not even watch the actions, just a few frames of what human is doing. And at test time, it can directly perform that task of knot tying. So it is never trained for this task. It never saw this example in its training. So it is generalizing because of the fact that it built a model of how the world works. Same idea can be applied to other robots as well, like navigation. So we left this robot in office, kind of annoying for 15 days around people, and it builds a model. And then at test time, we take this robot, we put in a new environment, and we say, can you go from here to here in a new map? And it can learn, it can use it learned skill and go to the goal image. Now note that at least in navigation, you can do it by other approaches as well, like visual SLAM, modeling camera and correspondences. But here it is cool because this behavior is completely emergent. Like the robot was never trained for this task. It is doing it completely out of its own exploration, right? So far, so like I began with motivating this whole idea of learning without goal and exploration from humans and maybe crows and chickens. So we are also tying the loop back and trying to study how well do these curiosity-driven algorithms actually capture the behavior in human children. So on the left, you see the screen that this kid over here sees. And on the right, she's playing with this customized, I don't know what to call it, this joystick to play the game. And the idea is we are collecting data to see if in kids also exploration leads to generalization. Like the kids who explore more, do they transfer better to unseen environments? and also how similar is this exploration to the exploration we see in agent. And the goal here is to have a common environment to study both of them. So we picked this maze environment, which is from DeepMind Lab. But that being said, no matter what I do in this environment, okay, we may find a positive result, but in our heart, we know that there is still a big difference between how this learning is happening in humans and is happening in agents. Humans do not start their learning tabula rasa, unlike agents, which began completely from scratch and learned everything on their own, right? So let me show you this by an example. So look at this screenshot of a video game, right? I bet you have never seen this game before. You know why? Because we just made it up. This is a completely made up game. And but however, even without having seen this game or ever played it, you already know so much about this. So this is a joint work with Tom Griffiths, I think, who's also on the call. Like you already know that, oh, there is this pink person here. He's probably a bad guy. This is probably a good guy. This is a platform, etc. So you have so much information about this. But when I re-render this now, now if you see this is very hard to see, okay, what is going on? And we asked a lot of M-Turkers and humans to play this game, and they were really annoyed. They could not really figure out what to do, how to win the game, etc. And that's the whole point. So humans bring to bear this lot of prior knowledge. And when we remove that prior knowledge from these games, just as an example, right, the performance drops. So here is the human on the left, the performance drops completely. While these reinforcement learning, or this is a curiosity-driven agent, the performance remains the same. Why? Because they are learning from scratch in this new environment. It doesn't matter. So although I'm showing a negative example for human, but this is a positive example. Like we are missing this gap in our algorithms, which leads us humans to be so efficient. We have a lot of studies in this paper, but let me show you one example. This is of objects. Psychologists like Liz Spelke and others have argued for the importance of objects throughout their career with lots of examples. And here is one example over here. When I see these objects, this is the exploration of real humans on this game. But look at this. As I remove the object, the exploration becomes much worse, right? And so because humans are using these objects as a prior to guide their exploration in a directed manner. So we have also tried to somehow bring these, so I'll not go into these work, but these are some other works where we have tried to bring the object prior into learning algorithms. And of course, via unsupervised learning and how can the agent learn on their own. In contrast to the way it is done typically in vision, where you supervise for object via mask and everything. So we use motion or interaction. So these are the two cues which are argued to be very important for learning about objects, at least in humans. But let me go to a bigger picture here. Like we know that humans are born with something and some things are learned, right? So from the perspective of intelligent machine, the question is always, should I take inspiration from human adults and build all the knowledge and priors they have? Or as argued by Turing, we should start from our systems in the same way like a child and learn everything from there. So this is a spectrum, and there is always this question of nature versus nurture, correct? Now, from if I'm a human psychologist or neuroscientist, it makes sense to be tied to this timeline. But as a computer scientist, I don't do the hard work myself. It is done by the computers. So can we really start really simple and extend this argument even all the way back? Like instead of learning from the stage of human, like curiosity, etc., why not learn it all the way back and go all the way back in the timeline and start really simple, right? And learn these priors at the first place, because this term of prior knowledge or object prior or this prior, that prior, I mean, priors are eventually learned if you look at the evolutionary timeline, because everything began from calcium, magnesium combining with electricity and water. There was no prior of object in there. So it must have been learned somewhere along the way. And this is what the focus of the talk is. So far I talked about ontogeny, which is the learning during the life of the agent. But there is this phylogeny, which is all the learning of all the priors that we have seen from the evolutionary development. And the question is, okay, what is even earlier than this? And this is the last part of the talk. Like, I would argue that long before these brains evolved, there was already a sort of distributed collective intelligence among cells, like when cells combine to become single cell to multi-cell. And let me show you some examples here. Like this example is from Michael Levin, who is a biologist, that like in these flatworm, the intelligence somehow is throughout the body of the agent. There is no specific role for the brain. So for instance, these cells throughout the body capture the blueprint of the whole body, so including the brain. So if you take this flatworm and cut at the bottom, like at the tail, and you change the catalyst to fool the cells into thinking they are neck and not the tail, they grow a head on the tail. So now this is a two-headed flatworm. So it means that the cell and the tail knew about the head, which is very surprising. And slime molds are an example where there is no central authority. It's just driven by this. And this example, I bet we all have seen, this ant. So ant colony is kind of a singular thing from a biology perspective, because these are completely distributed agents where there is no such importance to the brain. It's all, everything is learned over time through collaboration. So how does it help embodied robots? Well, there is this notion of like the time when things went from single cell to multi-cell. At this stage, things went from competition to collaboration. And when this happens, these things combine and they share the objective. So this kind of compositionality we have seen a lot in language, and this has been very, very helpful, right? But language is already described by humans. It's made by humans. So there is compositionality that we build in. So it's easy to extract it back. But can we now apply the same idea in robotics and learn and exploit this compositionality from scratch? So here is what we did in this playground environment. So we tried to study, okay, can we start from really, really simple cell-like agent and then build everything from there, ground up? So these are my robots here, very stupid, a cylinder and a motor, that's it. So, and motor can rotate in 3 directions, it has torque. But the catch is, or the interesting part is, not catch, is that these stupid robots can then combine with a via magnet and become more complex, like with this magnetic joint. And when they combine, just like cells, they become a single new agent and the rewards are shared. So again, the input is completely local, no brain as in the simple terms. Everything is decentralized. Everything is learned from scratch on these simple, stupid limbs, and then they combine to become more complex. So think of it as this evolutionary scale timeline. So there is nothing smart here. They have to learn very, very basic things. Okay. So I'll show some basic task over here. Let's say the task of standing up. Very simple, basic task. The goal is to maximize your y-axis. Now, if I train this via vanilla reinforcement learning, if there is one agent, it can stand up. If there is 2 agents, it can stand up. 3, it can barely stand up. But as I keep increasing the number of agents, the problem becomes much harder because now your action space is linearly increasing. It's like balancing the bottle on top of a phone or something like this. It's a very hard task. But we say, let these agents combine from scratch and learn on their own. And as we do that, these agents learn to combine and become more complex on their own. And they can learn to stand up. So this is like a curriculum learning, but happening in hardware. So how do we learn these composition controllers? I just very quickly describe the high level idea. The key idea is, much like that flatworm cells, we share the policies throughout the body of the agent. So every limb has a policy of its own. And these policies then need to adapt when the morphology changes. So if the agent has this shape and it copies its limb from here to here, the same policy has to somehow change its function over time. Now to do that, we treat these policies kind of like Lego block. Like you have seen Lego blocks, right? Lego blocks, you can put one on top of each other and remove the same one and put on the top or the other side. They have hooks to attach on anything from any point. But our policies don't have those hooks because input and outputs are different. So we just add this one extra hook, a message as input and a message as output. And these live in the same dimension. So when the agent has this shape, let's say we copy this network 3 times and it gets these shapes. But as this limb moved from here to here, we just cut it from here and we paste it here and just transfer the messages accordingly. So the idea here at a very high level that these agents will adapt by changing their messages and not their weights. So they are not fine tuning for new scenarios. So this is basically curriculum learning in hardware. And now the whole question, the whole argument for doing this simple thing is to generalize, right? The goal was not to train these agents to stand up. That's boring because I could have figured this out by some other way. I don't have to simulate this evolutionary kind of thing. The whole goal is to generalize to unseen scenarios. So here I'm showing the result of same policy, which is learned. And at test time, I increase the number of limbs to twice. And now you can see it can make a higher tower than before because it's a much harder task now. So it doesn't make a perfect tower, but it makes a higher one. But if the limbs are fewer, it makes a perfect tower. And this is a pure generalization happening here. You can also apply forces. It can still balance and do interesting things. And it is not trained for any of them. So let's say one more task of locomotion. And here, these agents can make this weird creature that can crawl to the right. This is training. Now at test time, I change the terrain from that one to this one. The same robot can just adapt instantaneously to this new terrain without any further training. So what is going on? Like, why are these robots adapting? So our hypothesis is that the learning is completely compositional. So think of it this way. A small robot trying to climb a small bump is similar to a big robot trying to climb a hill. Since the learning is modular, these agents are fine with losing a limb or two in the gap and still keep moving forward. It's kind of funny. But this was still on this robots, which are kind of changing shapes, etc. Can be applied to more normal and practical robot, like the one that we see in reinforcement learning, like these kind of robots, which maybe can be physically adapted. And before I show that, one result here that if you train vanilla RL here in this case, and you change one limb of the agent, it completely fails to generalize. So we use the same idea as I showed before, this modular message passing idea. And we train not just one robot, but a bunch of these practically occurring robots. And our goal is now, once I've trained this prior of how the motor synergies work, I should be able to transfer this to new agents at test time directly and make them walk. This is very challenging because every agent has different number of limbs, but every agent requires a different gait to walk. I'll skip the approach and just show the results here. So here we train a single policy, which is modular, and a single policy is controlling all the limbs of all the robot. So as you can see, if a robot has one leg, it kind of hops. If it has two legs, it walks. Now, same policy is controlling all these robots as well. Like they can, like this is, you can see the diversity of the behaviors, even the fact that the policy is still the same across everything. Like this is even more diversity. Like this robot is doing something else because it has short back leg or something. And this is the same policy. Now, these robots can also generalize to unseen agents. So these were held out agent, but of similar shape or similar distribution. So it's easy to generalize here. But what about very, very different robot? Like, can I just transfer it to some monstrous looking, very different kind of agents? And here we kind of went crazy in our imagination and created these robots. Now, out of the box, no further training, you can see that it is discovering some interesting gaits. So it is not like running forward because there is no goal, but it is still doing interesting things completely out of the box. Like here, you can also add object. I think we really went crazy in this and it still does reasonable things, this controller. It does fail sometimes, like when I add too much weight on the agent, like over here, this agent has too much weight in its body, so its muscle strength cannot support it, so it kind of fails. And how much time do I have? Or I'm already, my slides show 35 minutes. Or
actually, you're a little bit over time already.
Okay. So let me try to conclude it. Okay, so now one thing is like, is it even possible in the real world scenario? This is something which we are trying. Like these robots which have these motors and they share the policies at all locations, and some early result in this direction. Okay, so I think I'm almost done here. I'll just say that there are some like going forward at a very high level, our lab is interested in finding the intersection of the ideas and motivations from cognitive science, biology, and neuroscience. But the goal is to build practical systems at the interface of machine learning, vision, and robotics. And there are several ideas that needs to come together in such a goal. And like, for instance, we need to somehow put inductive biases in the learning process, like, and combine learning plus control. This is something which we are interested in. Like, here is one example. Like, these are robots which are learning to adapt directly at test time. And you can put weights and do whatever, but they can still adapt continuously. So like a mini dog which we are creating. And you also have to build rich models of how the world works, because as humans, we know we can reason in 3D and completely in imagination. So, and this is a very important thing for control and everything. So given the, like, for instance, this result is given the first image, as humans, I can imagine what is going on inside the scene. So we also build approaches, like this is a result. Given this first image, I can completely map out the scene and imagine what it will look like from all the angles. So I can go inside the scene from a single image. So this is a very recent paper which we just released, which can imagine the scene only from a first image. And the scene can be a painting, can be real world object, outdoor, indoor, and you can imagine what is going on in the scene, which I'll not cover and go into today. Just to summarize, I covered two aspects. What is one is ontogeny of the agent, which is learning during the life of the agent via curiosity without goal and adapt to new things. Then second is phylogeny, which is learning these primitives through a more fundamental and atomic process and grow the agent towards as the learning goes. So these are very early, like nowhere close to any real world, I think, product that we can sell yet, but I think it's a long way to go. And all the code and everything is available on my website. With that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepak, for this very colorful, playful talk. Questions? Again, speakers can just unmute themselves. Yeah, Mark.
Thank you. Fantastic talk, Deepak. It's maybe a bit of a clarification. I'm just trying to understand the setup better. If we go back to these agents that we're standing up together, what was the reward function, or what was the objective?
Yeah. So in this case, the objective was to stand up. So these are not curiosity driven. So these are two different parts. So these agents were actually given reward to stand up. So they were given the y-axis distance of the highest, I think the highest y-axis distance we have. Yeah.
So there's a collection of agents, but they share a global reward.
So this is like, think of it this way. Let's say in the real world, if there are different agents, they cannot know other functions, other person's reward. So it's not centralized. So what you are saying will be a centralized reward. So it's a decentralized reward. But unless when you combine, because when you combine, you become a common fate. You become a single new entity. So when you combine, you're a new robot, and then you get the combined reward.
I see. Okay.
So it's fully local in that sense. And the only way to know about other agents is to basically talk to them through the messages, but only in the physical contact. If you're far away, you cannot talk to each other.
Okay, thank you.
More speakers who would like to ask a question? Anyone? Okay, then we have a question from the audience, from an anonymous attendee. What are the metrics for intelligence? It seems subjective to say that the chicken is not intelligent because it's picking behavior. There might be some higher level of intelligence that are ungraspable at the scale of observation. Influences of the ecosystem, microorganism behaviors, etc. That might be crucial for their survival and health.
Yeah, this is the question which I'm always expecting whenever I say chicken is not intelligent, that somebody will say, no, chickens are also intelligent.
I mean, you shouldn't say that chickens are not intelligent. Even I agree with you, but anyway.
Yeah, well, I would say first of all, this is not my statement that they're not intelligent. This is a widely held belief from a common sense perspective that like they're intelligent in some aspects. Like they are very good locomotion agent. Like they can run around. Like it's very hard to catch a chicken. I mean, if you Google videos, it's really super hard. So they're good in that aspect. But what I meant over there is more in like abstract thinking and doing like, can they, so there are multiple tests that people did with crows, which chicken cannot do at all. For instance, can they make use of tools to pick up food where crows excel? And the second test was, I didn't go into the detail, but can they use one tool to pick up the second tool to pick up the food? And crows can also do that. And this is really surprising. And that's what this whole distinction was. So yeah, I was referring to more like a abstract level or reasoning when I say intelligence than anything else. But that being said, there are also I have myself Googled this question to embrace myself for the preparation of this question. So there are also some papers which say that, oh, chickens are not that dumb as we thought. But I'm yet to see a paper which says chickens are intelligent from an abstract reasoning point of view.
Okay, I think that answered the question.
We have Alberto asking, if we are not interested in generalization and we just want the agent to solve a task, do you believe initial exploration without the goal is still beneficial for training?
Yeah, so I think if this question was asked to me before, like 1 month ago, I would have said no, because my belief is that if you really want, like, for instance, take examples of robot in conveyor belt. We have robots already that make a lot of things in your houses. Like they can put nuts and bolts together, and that's what they do all their day, 24/7, all year long. And for such tasks, you probably don't need exploration. You can just solve them by optimization. Generalization is, which is basic, or either generalization or the ability to function do multiple things with the same robot. Those kind of things will need exploration. And that's, I think, a widely held belief. But in some experiments, recently we are also finding that actually having an interest, exploration reward, even for a specific goal, kind of helps if you test robustness, which is not generalization. Like even the same task, but if you change some things, the robustness is still improved. And that's kind of understandable because the agent is probably learning a more wider distribution than just that narrow, yeah.
Maybe we have a last question, which is from Vasiliki Liakoni. And she asked, how would you discuss the last part of your talk, which involved collaboration and sharing, to your earlier part, which involved disagreement and, which involved competition and disagreeing models?
Yeah. So this is a pretty interesting question. And I can give a more concrete answer and I can give a very high level philosophical answer.
Maybe we start with a concrete answer.
Yeah, so the concrete answer is that we have not yet combined the curiosity. So curiosity is for goals, while this collaboration and sharing part was for the body of the agent, right? And these are two different things. So we were evolving the hardware, while in curiosity, we had the same hardware and we were generalizing different tasks. So they are very complementary, not opposing in any way. In fact, we could, I think that's what Mark was referring to when he asked the question, we could basically put the curiosity reward on top of these agents and it would not change anything. It might not work immediately because these things are still nascent stage. And if you don't have any body and don't have any brain, then this kind of weird setup cannot do any goal. And so it's like very hard, but we plan to combine them into the future.
Okay, thank you very much. For the sake of time, I think we stop here. Thanks once more, Deepak. Okay, we're running a little bit late of time. Maybe we have a, say, 17-minute break, so that means we postpone our program by 5 minutes. That's even for Swiss standards hard to accept, but it's still in the gray zone. So we will come back at 15:50